Snow was falling silently over Halifax, as if time itself had decided to slow down. It wasn't just a cold night. It was the kind of night where even thoughts shiver. The streets were deserted, windows shut, and the wind howled through the corners with a piercing persistence. At the top of a hill, Elena's hurried steps marked the white ground with footprints that seemed to vanish almost instantly. She was coming from the hospital. Again. 12 straight hours caring for strangers, holding desperate hands, wiping away tears, trying to ignore the exhaustion that had long been screaming within her. She wore an old olive-green coat inherited from her mother, with loose buttons and fraying cuffs, but it was still the best protection against the biting wind. Her face bore the marks of endless shifts. Not just physical fatigue, but the expression of someone who had seen more pain than she'd ever wanted to. At 30, Elena had no luxuries, no holidays, no one waiting for her at home. But she kept going. Every night, every step, every tired breath was part of the routine that kept her sanity hanging by a thread. But that night, something was different. A vague, almost imperceptible premonition seeped under her skin like the insistent cold her waterproof boots couldn't stop. The bus stop had already disappeared into the white fog when she walked past it. But all it took was a slight glance for something to catch her attention. Or rather, someone. There, hunched beneath the small metal shelter, a man seemed to have become part of the landscape. He was motionless, almost like a statue molded by pain. His wet hood concealed part of his face, but what little was visible revealed distant eyes, as if his body had been ripped away from the place his mind still clung to. His clothes were elegant, clearly expensive, soaked in snow, as if he'd been there far too long for someone who should be home, safe, and warm. Elena stopped, just for a second. But that second was enough for the cold to settle deeper in her bones. Not the kind brought by weather, but by doubt. Who was he? Why was he there? Had he been robbed? Was he running from something? Or just lost? She shook her head and kept walking. This wasn't her problem. She already dealt with more than she could handle. She helped too many people already. And yet, with every 2 steps forward, something in her chest tightened, as if his silence was screaming inside her, as if the world was asking in that exact moment a wordless question. Are you really going to walk away? She turned back. Maybe it was his vacant stare, his fingers purple from the cold, or just the fact that in a city of tall buildings and low hearts, someone needed to do something different. Elena approached slowly. She didn't say anything right away. She just looked, and the man with difficulty lifted his eyes and whispered in a hoarse voice as if unused for days. Just for one night. Then I'll go. She didn't answer at first. She simply stood there, the wind howling between them. Then, without thinking, without planning, without fully understanding, she extended her hand. Because sometimes, the true miracle begins with a simple gesture, and on that frozen night when everything seemed asleep, something was beginning to awaken. The silence on the street was absolute, broken only by the sound of Elena's steps sinking into the soft snow. But something about that man made the world around them seem even quieter. She watched him closely now, her heart beating faster, without really knowing why. He didn't seem violent. He didn't seem drunk. He wasn't asking for help. And maybe that was the strangest part. The way he didn't ask for anything. His body trembled, not violently, but steadily, as if at war with the cold and already losing. His clothes clashed completely with that setting. A gray Italian wool overcoat, leather shoes clearly not meant for snow, and a shirt that, even soaked, revealed fine fabric and impeccable stitching. Everything about him screamed that he didn't belong there. Not to that place, not to that moment, not to that silent ruin. But his face. Oh, his face. That was where the real mystery lived. Even shadowed and frostbitten, Elena noticed the sharp jawline, the unshaven beard, the sunken eyes locked onto some invisible point, as if reliving a private tragedy. It wasn't a begging look, nor an arrogant one. It was a broken one. The gaze of someone who hadn't just lost something, but had lost themselves too. She stepped a little closer, now just a few feet away, still torn between compassion and self-preservation. She took a deep breath, as if searching in the freezing air for an answer. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, her voice low, but steady. The man didn't move. For a second, she thought he hadn't heard. Then he blinked slowly and turned his face toward her. Their eyes met, and Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He began, but his voice cracked like a fraying rope. "Just for one night. Then I'll go." That sentence carried an invisible weight, as if he truly believed he only needed that one chance. A truce. A pause before returning to the void. Elena didn't respond right away. She looked around, not a soul in sight. Just the pale sky, the rooftops buried in white, and the city suspended in winter. She knew that here, at this lonely intersection, where she always paused to breathe before the final climb home, a choice had to be made. She knelt slowly, meeting his gaze, and up close she saw the redness on his fingertips, the cracked lips, the labored breath. He was weaker than he wanted to appear. "You can't stay out here," she said, with the gentleness she reserved for her most fragile patients. "You'll freeze in this snow." He lowered his eyes, as if he no longer had the strength to argue. It wasn't pride, it was surrender. "Come with me," she added, offering her hand. He hesitated, not out of mistrust, but as if accepting that hand meant more than it appeared. As if that gesture wasn't just shelter. It was the chance to return to life. And that thought still felt too far away. But he took it, with cold fingers, fragile but firm. And then, without another word, the two began to climb the hill. Snow continued to fall, covering everything in its silent white, while the world around them seemed not to notice that in that moment, an entire story was about to begin again. The climb up the hill felt longer that night. The wind pushed against them, snapping dry branches like protest with every step Elena and the stranger took. The gravel path was hidden beneath a layer of snow, making the way slippery and uneven. Elena walked ahead, arms tight to her body, feeling the weight of the decision she had just made. She didn't yet know his name. She didn't know where he came from, or what had led him to that rusted shelter. But something inside her, something no logic could explain, told her she couldn't leave him there. Behind her, the man walked with difficulty. His steps dragged uneven, as if each movement required immense effort. Elena could hear his breath, heavy, broken, like a wounded animal. At another time, she might have felt fear. But now, there was only a quiet unease, an urgent desire to protect him from what he clearly could not face alone, his own collapse. Neither of them spoke along the way. There was something solemn about the walk, an unspoken pact that needed no words. The only sounds were their footsteps in the snow and the muffled howl of the wind weaving through the distant houses. When they finally reached the small house at the top of the hill, Elena felt her shoulders relax. It was a simple place, weathered wood and an ice-covered roof, with a small porch lined with empty pots and a glowing lamp that flickered like a tired star. It had once belonged to her grandparents, the place she grew up in after losing her parents, and now the keeper of her quietest memories. It was modest, but it was shelter, and tonight it would become a refuge. She unlocked the door with slightly trembling hands. The wood creaked as it opened, as if the house itself was surprised to receive a stranger. Elena entered first, switched on the light in the living room, and turned to him, still standing at the door. "You can come in," she said, softening her expression. "It's warm inside." He took a hesitant step, looking around as if crossing a threshold between two worlds. It was clear that this space felt far from anything he'd known. Books stacked in corners, folded blankets on the couch, old photographs on the wall. Each object seemed to tell a silent story, and he wasn't sure if he was allowed to listen. When he stepped inside, the heat from the fireplace hit him like a punch. For a moment he staggered, as if the sudden warmth had reminded his body of its exhaustion. Elena walked over, pulled the nearest armchair toward the fire, and gestured toward it. "Sit. I'll get you dry clothes." He obeyed without protest, and the sound of his body sinking into the old armchair filled the room with a kind of surrender. His eyes were red, not from tears but from the cold, or maybe from crying too much before getting there. Elena returned with a clean set of sweats, thick socks, and a towel. She handed everything over without asking questions. She knew it wasn't the time yet. "The bathroom's that way, if you want to change." He looked at her with deep weariness, and something in his eyes said thank you without speaking a word. And then, for the first time that night, Elena realized he wasn't just a stranger. He was someone shattered on the inside. And now, there, hunched before the fire, he was beginning, silently, to piece himself back together. The door clicked shut behind them, muffling the wind still howling outside. Inside the house, the fireplace's warmth began to chase the chill from their bones. The soft yellow light of the floor lamp cast gentle shadows on the wooden walls, creating an intimate, almost dreamlike atmosphere. His presence, still silent and tense, seemed to shift the air in the room, as if something grand, though invisible, was unfolding there. He, though Elena still didn't know his name, sat in the armchair, hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the fire. His soaked clothes dripped quietly onto the old rug, but he seemed unaware, even of the obvious discomfort. There was in him an absence so present, it filled the room, as if he was there only by courtesy of his body, while his mind remained somewhere far away, in pieces. Elena watched from the corner of her eye as he struggled against his own numbness. She returned from the kitchen with a steaming mug of chamomile tea and placed it on the side table next to him. "It's hot. You can drink it whenever you like." He nodded slightly, not taking his eyes off the fire. His silence, more than awkward, felt almost respectful, as if quietly asking permission to exist in a space that wasn't his. Elena walked over to the hallway closet, retrieved a thick blanket, and draped it gently over his shoulders. He held the fabric with hands still cold and looked at her, finally. His eyes, green, darkened by sorrow, met hers for a brief moment. And in that silence, she understood. He didn't want to be there, but he needed to be. The house, small and old, was made of memories. The embroidered couch from her grandmother, the framed painting of dried flowers made by her mother, the books inherited from her father. Elena, long accustomed to solitude, rarely had visitors. Not out of pride, but because she had grown used to silence. That was where she felt safe. But in that moment, seeing him so vulnerable and lost, her rigid rules felt absurd. No emotional safety manual could have prepared her for a night like that. "I can place your dry clothes near the heater if you want to change," she said, pointing toward the bathroom. He nodded, finally taking the sweatpants and hoodie she'd left on the armrest. He stood slowly, his movements restrained, and crossed the room in heavy, deliberate steps. Elena remained in the living room, listening to the crackling fire and the gentle ticking of the wall clock. Minutes later, he returned. The borrowed clothes were a bit loose but clean and dry. His washed face revealed striking features, a man still clearly young, yet carrying the weight of years compressed into just a few days. He sat again in the armchair, now holding the mug with both hands. He took a sip. "Thank you," he murmured, barely audible. Elena offered a faint smile and sat in the other armchair across from him, her own cup in hand. The silence between them was thick, but not hostile. It was a silence of respect. Two strangers meeting at a crossroads in life. They didn't exchange names. They didn't share stories. They simply shared the warmth of the tea, the comfort of the fire, the rare rest of a night without demands. And there, in that humble house atop the hill, an invisible wall began to dissolve. It was the beginning of something, not a miracle, not a storybook romance, just a human gesture. And sometimes, That's all someone needs to begin breathing again. The fire's crackle filled the room with a soothing sound, while steam rose gently from Elena's cup. He still sat motionless, as if every sip was a calculated effort, a small victory against the invisible weight that bound him. The space felt warm, but something lingered, a quiet tension that refused to fade, a distance no fire could bridge so easily. Elena watched him, searching for a way to help without intruding on the fragile fortress he had built around himself. It wasn't just the cold or physical exhaustion. It was something deeper, a wound untouched by hugs or hollow words. When he finally set the mug down on the side table, a white envelope slipped from his hand to the floor. Elena noticed and bent down to pick it up, curiosity tightening in her chest. The envelope was plain, but as she opened it, she saw what was inside: a faded photograph and an elegant invitation, handwritten in cursive, heavy with a story only he knew. The image showed a smiling couple dressed for a wedding, Lucas in a flawless suit and a woman with wavy brown hair in a classic white dress. The invitation bore a date, just 3 weeks before that freezing night, and names Elena had never heard before: Lucas Reinhardt and Isabella Mancini. She looked up at him. He was already watching her with an expression of pain and resignation. "She ran away with my best friend," he said, his voice hoarse and low, almost a whisper. "On our wedding day. Left only this." Those words carried a weight that seemed to crush the air around them. Elena's breath caught for a second. That pain wasn't hers, but it echoed inside her as if it were. The pain of someone betrayed at the threshold of happiness, abandoned at the altar of their dreams. But he didn't ask for comfort. He didn't ask for anything. He simply let the grief occupy the space, as if it were the only place where he could feel whole, even while broken. Elena didn't say anything. There were no words that could heal that wound right away. Instead, she gave him a look that said, "I'm here, even if you don't know what to do with that." The silence between them became a fragile bridge, a delicate connection that, for the first time that night, began to build quiet trust. She brewed another cup of tea, now with a soft hint of mint, and sat beside him once again. Lucas held the mug with both hands, as if anchoring himself in a moment that felt endless. His fingers, once trembling, began to still, though the pain remained. No more words were needed. That moment was its own conversation, a shared humanity that didn't rely on polished phrases or explanations. Just presence, warmth, gentle silence. Elena understood that for him, that envelope and photo weren't just painful remnants. They were also a reason to go on, a fragment that, though laced with sorrow, still carried the hope that one day he might stand again. She realized healing wouldn't come quickly, nor in a straight line. But it had begun, in the simple offering of tea, the silence they shared, and the safe space he accepted. As the night wore on, shadows danced softly along the wooden walls, and outside snow continued to fall, wrapping the world in white. But inside that little house, something was changing. A faint spark, small but real, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, life could offer a second chance. And that night, Elena and Lucas shared much more than warmth. They shared the quiet beginning of a journey that, despite the scars, still held space for hope. The silence in the room carried the weight of all the unsaid words as Lucas sat still, staring at the photo and the invitation now resting on the side table. The fire's flicker danced across his eyes, which wandered through painful memories, distant yet piercing, as if each image on that photograph was a thorn lodged in his soul. Elena watched with a heavy heart, aware that this paper was more than a fragment of the past. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, the two of us, forever. But she ran away, with my best friend, at the altar. His words came out with a sorrow that left no room for doubt. Elena felt a sting in her chest, not her pain, but one that resonated as if it were. Betrayal, abandonment in its most brutal form. A blow that didn't just destroy a wedding but shattered trust, love, and the hope of an entire future. Lucas ran his hands over his face, as if trying to wipe away the weight of it all. But it was useless. That night, just weeks ago, still lived in every corner of his mind. The sound of the music in the hall, the laughter that now seemed fake, the slicing silence when he realized he was alone at the altar. And worst of all, not just losing her, but the betrayal of the one who was supposed to stand beside him. He spoke with a voice thick with emotion, almost as if speaking only to himself. They took everything, not just her. They took my dignity, my pride. Left me only this, he said, pointing to the photo and the invitation. The only things left from a day that never truly happened. Elena stayed silent, letting him find his own words, giving space to breathe the pain that couldn't be rushed. She knew that offering comfort in that moment wasn't about saying the right thing. It was about simply being there, allowing time to begin its slow, painful work. That cold night, so unlike all others, was marked not just by the snow outside, but by the storm inside a man fighting to survive the ruins of his own heart. Lucas wasn't seeking pity. Perhaps he was seeking a lost piece of himself, something that could still be recovered somehow. As he sat there, immersed in sorrow, Elena felt an unexpected connection form between them, not made of words, but of shared humanity. She knew that envelope and photograph were more than memories. They were the key to understanding who he was, and maybe to helping him find his way back to life. As the night wore on, the walls around Lucas began to soften. The scars, though deep, no longer needed to be carried alone. And in that little house on the hill, between the crackling fire and the companionable silence, two souls began to see each other. Not through the pain that separated them, but through the quiet hope of what might still come. The invitation and the photo remained on the table, silent witnesses of a painful past, and symbols that even in the deepest shadows, a new beginning is always possible. Lucas didn't yet know what path lay ahead, but for the first time he felt he might not have to walk it alone. The silence in the small living room began to take shape, a presence of its own, filling the space between the two people seated by the fire. Lucas sat with his eyes closed, hands resting in his lap, wrapped in the thick blanket Elena had given him. His breathing, once ragged and uneven, began to settle into a softer rhythm, as if his body was finally accepting the pause it had long needed. Elena watched in silence, knowing nothing more needed to be said. Sometimes healing doesn't come with grand gestures or dramatic words. Sometimes it arrives in the simple act of being together, of quietly sharing a cold, endless night. That moment, however unassuming, was powerful. It was a truce in his battle against the loneliness and despair he carried. Around them, the fire danced in small flames, casting soft shadows that moved gently across the wooden walls. The house, modest and old, seemed to breathe with them, holding space for that silent bond forming between two strangers. Outside, the snow kept falling, muffling the world and creating a kind of bubble, a stillness where time seemed to slow down just enough to allow for healing. Lucas shifted slightly, opened his eyes slowly, and looked at Elena with a gaze no longer of desperation, but of quiet vulnerability. He raised a trembling hand to touch the blanket around him, as if it were the only thing anchoring him to the real world. And then, for the first time that night, the faintest, most hesitant shadow of a smile formed on his dry lips. Elena felt her heart tighten, not from pity but from hope. That small change, almost imperceptible, was a sign, a signal that something inside him was beginning to loosen, to release. The invisible weight he carried still clung to him, but it seemed just a bit lighter. As the night deepened, Lucas began to speak in soft murmurs, fragmented words, more to himself than to her. He shared scattered memories, not of the wedding, not of the betrayal, but of simpler moments, of better days, of times when life still felt kind. He spoke of sunny mornings, of laughter that now seemed distant, of little things that, in darkness, glowed with unexpected light. Elena listened intently, without interrupting, allowing him to reclaim his voice little by little. She knew this was a crucial step, not a complete healing, but the beginning of the process. Sometimes, the deepest wounds only begin to mend when silence is broken, even if just with trembling, hesitant words. When Lucas finally settled into the armchair, his shoulders no longer so tense, Elena noticed he had fallen asleep. A light sleep, but real. And in that moment, something inside her warmed with a mixture of relief and admiration. Even if it was just a small victory, it was a meaningful one. He had allowed the darkness to retreat for a few hours, making room for the rest his body and soul so desperately needed. In that shared silence, between the warmth of the fireplace and the cold outside, the night took on a new meaning. It was no longer just a battle against winter, but a moment of quiet rebirth, where hope began to bloom, shy but resilient. Elena knew the road ahead would still be long, that pain and loss wouldn't melt away as fast as snow under the sun. But in that instant, she believed Lucas had found, if only temporarily, a refuge. A place where he could finally breathe without the crushing weight of the past. And so, in that modest house on top of the hill, between the crackle of flames and the stillness of dawn, a quiet healing began, made of presence, of small gestures, of patience that asked for nothing in return but the chance to start again. Morning came slowly, with a gray sky and a silence different from the one that filled Halifax's icy nights. When Elena opened her eyes, the soft daylight had already begun to filter through the window slats, announcing a new chance. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the house, mingling with the fading scent of wood and tea still lingering in the air. She got up slowly, her body still heavy from the long, quiet night. As she walked into the living room, she found Lucas standing by the stove, awkwardly trying to make coffee. The scene, though simple, carried deep symbolism. There he was, almost a shadow of the broken man from the night before, but moving with a faint determination, a quiet effort to take back control of his own life. The fresh aroma filled the room, and the faint steam rising from the mug seemed to carry a promise of renewal. Elena sat at the kitchen table, watching him with a mixture of surprise and tenderness. Lucas seemed different, not just because he was on his feet, but because of the faint light in his eyes, a spark that suggested, no matter how hard it was, he was trying to move forward. He turned around, and in his gaze was a mix of gratitude and sadness, still present, but now softened. "Sorry for the trouble," he said, his voice steadier, though still humble. "I promise I'll be gone soon. I don't want to get in your way." Elena shook her head gently, offering a soft smile. "You're not in the way, and there's no need to go yet." He seemed to hesitate, as if struggling against the idea of accepting help a little longer. But before he could reply, Elena walked over to the small table by the door and picked up a letter she'd found on the counter, carefully folded and handwritten. "Did you write this?" she asked, holding up the yellowed paper. Lucas nodded, with a look that carried the purest sincerity. "It's for you," he said, "to thank you for not walking away, for calling me back to humanity, even without knowing my name." She opened the letter and read the words written in careful script. "You saved my life without knowing it. You gave me a piece of what I had already lost, hope. Thank you for that." At the bottom was a phone number, a quiet invitation to continue what had started, to not let that night be just a fleeting encounter. Elena felt her eyes well up, not from sadness, but from genuine emotion. That simple gesture carried more meaning than any spoken word could express. It was a silent acknowledgement that sometimes life puts people in our path, where a single act of kindness can change everything. Lucas looked at her and smiled timidly. "Can I make more coffee?" he asked, a quiet attempt to hold on to that fragile sense of normalcy and closeness. She nodded, and in that moment, the house, once a cold, quiet shelter, was becoming a place where hope had begun to grow. It was the start of something new, a quiet beginning made of simple gestures and sincere looks. The sun, still shy, peeked between the clouds, lighting the darker corners of the house and, perhaps, the darker corners of Lucas's heart. And there, in that instant, they both knew the journey wasn't ending that morning. It was just the first step, a step that might lead toward healing, trust, and maybe even a reconnection. Elena smiled at him with a tenderness born of understanding and the sincere desire to see that man find his place in the world again. Lucas returned the smile, and for the first time in a long time, that gesture seemed to carry the promise that, even on the coldest nights, hope can be reborn. That same morning, Lucas left. 2 weeks had passed since that morning when Lucas had brewed coffee with quiet determination, and the house on the hill still held in its silence the memory of the transformation that had begun. Elena had returned to her demanding hospital shifts, caught in the exhausting rhythm of her routine, while the snow slowly melted, making way for the gentle promise of spring. But that gray, chilly Sunday brought an unexpected break in the monotony of her isolation. She heard a soft knock at the door, almost shy, as if afraid to disturb the delicate balance forming between solitude and hope. She opened the door slowly, and there he was, Lucas. This time, different. Clean, in new clothes that no longer looked out of place, holding a bouquet of white chrysanthemums in his hands. The same flowers his grandmother used to grow, a symbol of purity and rebirth. He smiled, that subtle, genuine smile that carried the lightness of someone who, for the first time in a long time, was learning to believe again. "Can I return the tea? With company this time?" he asked, voice trembling slightly but filled with hope. Elena felt a lump in her throat, a mix of joy and emotion that made her glance away for a moment. That simple phrase held immense meaning. It wasn't just an invitation to share a warm drink. It was an invitation to build something new. A bridge between two souls marked by the past but open to the future. She smiled back, eyes misty, and stepped aside to let him in. The warmth of the house now felt stronger, more alive, as if reflecting the change happening inside them. The sound of snow melting outside made the perfect backdrop for that reunion. Quiet, delicate, full of promise. They sat together in the living room, just like that first night, but with one essential difference. There was now a connection between them that no longer needed words. The flowers rested on the table, a living reminder that hope, even in the hardest moments, can bloom again. Lucas said little, but his gestures, his glances, his hesitations revealed a desire to rebuild, to rise again, with help. Elena saw that the man who had once been broken, lost, was beginning to find himself, piece by piece. It wasn't an easy path, nor a fast one, but it was real. In that moment, between the comfortable silence and the gentle bubbling of the tea, they discovered that life can begin again. That kindness, the act of reaching out without expecting anything, can transform destinies. That even on the coldest nights and in the darkest moments, the warmth of a heart willing to welcome can make all the difference. And so, in that simple house atop the hill, where snow was slowly giving way to spring, Elena and Lucas began a new chapter, not just of their individual stories, but of a shared journey. A story made of small steps, of trust, of courage to face the shadows of the past, and the hope to build what had not yet been written. Sometimes life rebuilds itself just like that, with tea, silence, and a heart willing to start again. So, did you enjoy this heartwarming story, even on the coldest nights? If you did, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and motivates me to bring you even more amazing stories. And of course, make sure to subscribe, because here, you'll always find emotion, twists, and that much-needed human warmth. Now tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to know where this special energy is coming from that makes everything even more magical. Drop it in the comments. Let's build a community full of love and good vibes. Until the next story, take care, keep your heart warm, and never lose hope.